What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Varendas. I did it the Portuguese way. And today we have Jen Briney on. She is the host of Congressional Dish podcast. She has an amazing podcast where she breaks down bills and tells you what's in them, who's influencing them, who's pushing for them, and why. And she's had a couple, some that's stuck out to me that we talk about on the show, which I highly recommend, is the anthrax bill, which is all about this mandatory anthrax vaccine, and it's linked to the Gulf War syndrome and Bioport and their kind of interesting story about how they got involved and how they got basically the account for the vaccines, even though they weren't the lowest bidder, and how the FDA suspended their account and all this stuff. And then after the 9/11 anthrax attacks, all of a sudden they got approved again. So that's really interesting. We also talk about the regime change podcast a little bit, which is a really interesting podcast because it just shows how it's public information that we're trying to take down the president of another country. And that's something we never really put in perspective. We never look at things from the perspective of foreigners and people from those countries that we're getting involved in. But this idea that we can get involved in politics and regime change in another country, and thinking that we're not going to create enemies doing this, or whoever we take down and we put to replace them is going to be a better alternative or better option. I mean, it's just insanity. And we've done it numerous of times. And it's funny because we talk about these historical events on this podcast all the time, like Iran-Contras and what was going on in Nicaragua, and us taking down leaders in Chile and Nicaragua and Guatemala and all these countries in Central and South America that we were involved. And most of this was during the communist scare, but we never put in perspective that this shit's happening now. This stuff still happens now. We talk about Iran-Contras like it's just a historical event, and that was past tense, and it's not occurring now, but it is, and it is happening now. We're getting involved in the Ukraine revolution. We're getting involved in Syria. We obviously got involved in Iraq, and it just seems like history continuously repeats, and we have to keep remembering the fact that none of these regime changes ever turn out well, and it's important for us to remember that and not continuously let them trick us into getting involved in these conflicts. And we're constantly just influencing what's going on around the world, and we wonder why we're creating enemies. But another great podcast she had recently was on the TPP, which is a Trans-Pacific Partnership. Very interesting how this all came about and who's influencing this, who wrote it, and what businesses and industries it's helping. And it's all very interesting. So definitely check that out. If you haven't heard about it, research it. I know people like James Corbett, Jesse Ventura, a lot of people in the alternative media are talking about it. You don't hear any conversation about it on mainstream media. It's not really a surprise. And also check out the podcast on the CISA bill, the cybersecurity bill. Super interesting. I highly recommend all those podcasts. Also, if you guys want to watch the video version of this episode, you can go on our YouTube channel where you can actually see me and Jen Briney actually have the conversation. Just go to YouTube and you can search RV Theory 6, which is also my Twitter handle, or you can look up the Ripple Effect podcast and subscribe to the podcast channel, which is RV Theory 6. And on that channel, you can find the documentary playlist, which I just started recently, and it has a bunch of documentaries that I've been a fan of for years, some new ones, old ones, good quality, bad quality, just a mixture, but everything's definitely worth watching. And if you're ever bored and looking for something to watch, check out the documentary playlist. I'm always adding things. Unfortunately, I'm always deleting things because it's amazing how many movies, documentaries get taken off YouTube just on the daily, because I have a watch later playlist too, a private one, which I put a bunch of documentaries I'd run into and don't have time to fully watch, and I might want to take a look at later, and constantly going through that list and finding deleted videos. So watch them while they're there, watch them while they're hot, get them while they're hot. And I don't know how long they're going to last, and some of them have been on there for a long time. You don't have to worry too much, but there are some that will just randomly disappear. So check that out. And also remember, if you want to support the show, you can buy Theory 6 music, which you can find anywhere where digital downloads are available. So if you like the intro or outro music, support the show by purchasing some Theory 6 music, and I'd really appreciate it, because the goal is to eventually do this podcast full time. That really seems like a far-fetched dream at the moment, but it's not going to stop me from continuing this podcast. And I absolutely love what I do. I love the fact that I can some way find the motivation and squeeze a time out of a busy schedule to do this. And I'm really happy with the fact that people contact me and people love the show. And I think I've had just as many past guests as I had fans contact me, tell me that they really appreciate what I do and all that stuff. And so I really feel obligated for myself and for the listeners and for the guests who take time out of their day to come on the show. I just feel like I have to do something, and this is my part, and this is my way of doing something. And I'm hoping that people who listen to the show, this podcast does for them what many podcasts do for me, and that's give me food for thought, give me something to think about, spark conversations, and it gives me a getaway from whatever chore I'm doing or whatever driving I'm doing for work, commuting or whatever. So hopefully I'm also helping with that little getaway. But like I said, I hope to do this full time eventually. I'm a long way from that at the moment, but I've been very lucky with the amount of fans that I do have, and everybody who continuously downloads and listens. And I can't thank you guys enough for doing that, because again, I was just a regular dude in a basement who wanted to do something, and I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I had equipment, and I knew I could talk, and I knew that I was passionate about these topics. So I guess podcasting was the perfect step for me. And I was also a fan of podcasts, so it was a perfect transition for me. I think I'll cut this intro now because it's been super long and you guys are probably sick of my long intros. I was doing a really good job with like quite a few podcasts with short intros, and I had to fuck it all up. But sorry guys, I'll cut it here, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Well, thanks for being with me. Like I said, I know you're busy. I know you got to popping out shows every week, and your shows are just so well researched. I absolutely love your show, and I think the deceiving thing about your show is that I don't think people anticipate on getting all the information that you actually get from your episodes, because you just think, okay, you're going to read bills, you're going to explain them, and you give us kind of a heads up on what's in them, and you go much deeper. 3 shows that recently has gotten my attention is your Anthrax show, which I actually talked to Robbie about. It's funny that we just brought him up, because I did talk to Robbie Martin about it, because he did a film on the Anthrax.
Oh, really?
On the whole Anthrax. I think it's called American Anthrax, and it's on YouTube for free. And he did a documentary on it, and because it was kind of like a forgotten part of the September 11th story. It was one of those things where we tend to forget that was a part of scaring the shit out of people and getting people to react and getting people to to feel like they have to do something. And like you said I believe you talked about on your podcast, and I know he talked about it in his film, is also how they're all dated 9/11, and how there's all this links to like hating Israel and all this stuff, and just it seemed like it was very, very well just designed to get people to, even if they don't connect the dots, for us to mentally connect the dots that this must have something to do with September 11th. But he didn't know anything about the vaccines, the anthrax vaccines, and I didn't either. And that was news to me, and it was funny because he's done tons of research on the whole anthrax scare, and he didn't know anything about the vaccines either. So that was a really, really interesting episode. And so how did you run into that? I mean, you went down that just, I mean, for people who don't know about your podcast, how would you describe your podcast for somebody who's listening?
Well, it's changed a little bit. I didn't realize that we were on the air, by the way.
Yeah, why
it's changed a little bit. When I first started, I was trying to read every bill that passed at least the House of Representatives, and I kind of realized recently that that's impossible. So the anthrax episode, that was actually one of the things that made me switch the structure. I'm not trying to read every bill anymore. I'm just trying to shed some light on stuff that I think is going on in Congress that no one is talking about and should be. So I'm really filtering it more because, I mean, in July, they passed 4,000 pages of legislation. It just wasn't possible to keep reading everything. And one of the reasons that I switched so much is that I found this 6-page bill about anthrax vaccines, and I just kind of like was looking into it. And that made me realize that, you know, just like you said, you're absolutely right that after 9/11, that was a big part of the story in the moment, because I remember I was in California at the time. So I'm really far away from New York City. I wasn't in an area that was downtown. There was no one who was going to attack me in that kind of way. But anthrax was in the mail, you know, and I definitely get mail, and so did everybody. So it was a way for all of us to feel like we were under attack. And so I was just sitting there and I was like, gosh, what happened with those anthrax attack letters? Like, I don't even know who did that. Like, and that's how I ended up looking into it. And the more I found out, the more I was amazed, like, how is it possible that we don't know who did the anthrax attacks? I mean, that was so integral of a part of the 9/11 attacks, and yet the story was just kind of dropped. And that's what made me change the structure of the show, because here I was trying to read 4,000 pages of bills, which like half of them didn't even matter. And yet there was this story just sitting in front of me. And so I really wanted to drop everything and record a podcast about it. And so I did. And so now Congressional Dish, it's still very much about Congress. But some other things I discovered over the course of the last few years is not only is there very interesting information inside of these bills, but there's very interesting hearings that are not being aired on C-SPAN. So you can find out about them in the congressional record. And sometimes they're not even in there, which I discovered with the TPP hearings. Those weren't in the congressional record. I stumbled upon it on YouTube. Otherwise, I never would have known. And those hearings give you so much context as to why these people are doing the things that they're doing. And so now I technologically know how to access these hearings, not only listen to them, but to share the highlights with people. And so Congressional Dish is also doing a lot of that. And I'm really enjoying this like new phase of the podcast, because these hearings have just been mind-blowing, you know, especially when you find out who the people are that they're asking to testify. Like there was one, I just did one on an authorization for the use of military force that's making its way through Congress. Really crazy episode. And the person that was called by Congress to give information on, you know, his opinion on what we should do with war things is a defense contractor. He's on the board of directors of General Dynamics. And that's not how they put it in the congressional record. They call him a public witness. It's like, no. You need to look at this guy's LinkedIn and you realize that he makes money every time we drop a bomb. So, yeah, the Congressional Dish is just exposing Congress in a way that the mainstream media doesn't seem interested in doing.
Yeah, it definitely has changed a little bit, but I think it's for the good, because it's amazing the information that you get from just reading the bills and watching these hearings. I mean, just like you talked about, you know, the regime change episode, just the fact that they're openly talking about taking down Assad and taking him out of power. I mean, it's crazy when you have these conversations with people, just, you know, just about what's going on in the world and geopolitics and stuff. And just the average person doesn't realize how public it is that their intentions are to take him down, which they're public. What they're telling us, the story publicly that they're telling us, doesn't really make any sense anyways, because it's like they want to fight ISIS, who is fighting Assad, but they also want to take down Assad. So I'm like, they're contradicting themselves and nobody's picking up on it. And so it's awesome to hear you analyze this stuff and keeping up with this stuff. And what's her name? Victoria Nuland, who has popped up quite a bit. She was in, actually, Robbie just did a documentary called a Very Heavy Agenda, all about PNAC and all that, and which, because she's married to Robert Keegan, who was in PNAC, which is now the FPI or something, like Foreign Policy Initiative or something. Yeah. And so it's amazing how all these people are interlinked. And one thing you said in your podcast, which is so true, is how all these people just kind of linger around. Like, it's a lot of the same names, a lot of the same people, and it doesn't matter who's in power. Like, I tell people all the time, like, you look at the president and you think that they're the ones pulling the strings, but there's so many people who have influence, from think tanks to corporations who are also linked to think tanks, and all these people are influencing what's going on. And a lot of the times it's the same names over and over again popping up. It's the same advisors. It's the same, and people don't realize that. They think that, if things go well, it's because the president did something right. If things go badly, it's because the president had bad policies. But they don't realize that all these things that are going on behind the scenes, and all these people who have tons of influence. I mean, you look at PNAC, how many people that were linked to campaigns and corporations and all this stuff, and it's just amazing how many of these politicians actually go to these think tanks for advice, or the CFR and all this stuff. So yeah, I mean, and obviously you see a lot of that too. I mean, you constantly see a lot of the same names popping up, right?
Oh yeah. And it's amazing. There was an agriculture hearing. I'll be doing an episode on this somewhat soon. I don't know. But they were calling John Negroponte, and he's a big Bush administration guy. And again, in the congressional record, he's just a public witness. But yeah, you're seeing people. And this is the thing, like, it does matter who we elect. But those are the people. Okay, so here's a good example. In 2008, we voted for Barack Obama instead of John McCain. Well, here we are in 2016, and John McCain is the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. So when it comes to making decisions about war, he has so much power to determine our war policy, and he's the one who's talking to the Secretary of Defense, and he's the one who's doing all of the oversight of this. So it's like, yeah, we didn't vote for him for president, but Congress in many ways matters more, because if he actually didn't like the fact that Obama was quite possibly bombing Syria illegally because their motivations, the authorization for military force that they're using is for going after terrorists. That's why they keep telling us in the mainstream media that they're going after ISIS, because that makes the whole thing legal. However, when you listen to what they say in these empty hearings, they're actually going after Assad. They're trying to replace the government. Well, that's illegal. And so if John McCain wanted to do anything about this, he's in the position where he actually could. And so what happens in Congress is so important and so ignored. And that's really like the bottom line of what Congressional Dish is I'm just trying to steal even a little bit of the spotlight away from the presidential race and be like, but this is the group of people that controls the money, and this is the group of people that make the laws. Like, look over here. This is where it's all getting done. And these witnesses that they're calling, it's the same people that have been ruling the world for 50 years. Last year, they called Henry Kissinger in for advice.
A war criminal. Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, it's and that's what I love about your podcast, because I think, like you said, it has evolved, and it's amazing how much you learn from hearing these podcasts and these episodes, and you really get into, these, like I said, you talked about the think tanks, you talked about, the WTO, you talked about, and I forget which episode not too long ago, the World Trade Organization, and where it came from, and who are those people linked to. And it's just like, you do a little investigating. It's amazing the rabbit hole you go down, and it's not that hard to find all these links. It's obvious who or why these decisions are being made. And from your perspective, and you analyzing so much of this and the hearings and bills and all this stuff, what do you think is going on, for example, in Syria? What do you think the motivation is? I know in one podcast you talked about the pipeline, which is kind of seems coincidental. It could be or could not be. But what do you think that's the main reason? Is it just as simple as natural resources? I mean, have you learned anything from the hearings and stuff that kind of exposes what the intentions could be?
Not really from the hearings. And I think the main part is because Congressional Dish started too late. I really should go back and listen to some stuff from like 2011, 2012, because something happened, and it did have to do with the pipelines. There was this pipeline that was supposed to go, I think it was through Qatar and then Syria and Turkey. So that's like the pipeline we wanted. And instead of building that pipeline to get gas from Russia to Europe, instead, the president of Syria wanted one that went Iran, Iraq, Syria. And when that decision was made, we decided that regime change had to happen. And so all of this stuff we're seeing in Syria, I mean, I think that was 2012, 2013. Barack Obama tells us that we're going to bomb this country that most of us can't even find on a map. And but this pipeline was a big part of it. And now, I mean, it's been so long that I honestly think it's still the same thing. We want this guy out of power, and we're not going to stop until he's gone. But unlike with Iraq, we're not being open about that with the American people. And it's just like a much shadier thing. But that's the other thing. Everything that I'm talking about, all of these hearings, everything I'm reading is all in the public domain. So the reason that we don't know about it isn't necessarily the people in Congress. They're being quite open about this, as you've heard on my show. I mean, I have clip after clip after clip where they're saying we are going to get rid of this president. It's the media's fault. Because if I can do this, anyone on the TV can do this. They're just not. And so, yeah, I don't even remember what your question was.
I'm not sure I do either. But the media is such an issue. I'm so glad there's podcasts, and I hope it keeps growing, because, I mean, there's so many people that are just stuck in the everyday grind of going to work, taking care of their kids. They come home, and then that little bit of time that they watch TV before they pass out, whatever information they consume, that ends up molding their perspective. I mean, it's amazing how many people I still talk to, and to be honest, most of them are older, so I guess, they're probably dying out a little bit. There's probably not as many, but there's a lot of people who still consider, like, MSNBC or even Fox News a legit news organization, and it always boggles my mind, because I'm like, I thought this was an open secret. I thought, like, everybody knew. Like, when you meet somebody who honestly thinks you're kidding, when you're like, dude, it's obvious, like, they have an agenda and they play within the lines, and it boggles my mind. And luckily for alternative media, I mean, I think more people our age are watching TV on YouTube and online, and now that YouTube is doing the live streaming thing, that's becoming more popular. I think it's going to get to a point where everybody's going to be listening to podcasts and doing all their entertainment online. And I think mainstream media, I think most of their fans are probably dying off. And I think a lot of the ratings come from gyms, having it on in the background, or an airport having it on in the background.
Their ratings are crap. It's the Nielsen system, which is, it's nonsense. And we're not even counted. That's what's amazing. Like, if you have a cable, set top box, you're not counted. It's the people that have these really old Nielsen counters. So I think that's why you get something like, American Idol. We're being told it's the #1 show, even though I don't even know if it's still on. I don't know anyone who watches this stuff, but you're being told these ratings are huge. Well, it's because our grandparents are the only ones who are being counted. And I think you nailed it right on the head. I think it's an age thing. The people that are in the internet age are really, really into it. But we're not in the halls of Congress. It's still our parents and grandparents. Because I've noticed that there is no one under the age of 40 that I've talked to that thinks Fox News is legit. They're completely aware that they might not be able to tell you exactly what the bias is, but they know something's fishy there. It's baby boomers, man. They're the ones that are still buying the stuff. They're the ones that are still watching TV. I mean, CBS, I don't even know anyone that watches CBS. All those shows are meant specifically for the older generation. And that does give me a lot of hope that there is this whole group of people that's being ignored by those in power. We're kind of slipping in under the radar. And if we were to vote, we could change everything quite quickly, because we outnumber them. And we do get our information from sources that are, I mean, I do a lot of fact checking, but there is a problem too, where the internet, I mean, people can say whatever they want and it flies. But I think we're also, now that we've had the internet for, 15 years really, since we've all had it, I think we're learning how to filter good information from crap. It was overwhelming for a while, but we're getting there. And so I have a lot of hope for our generation, as soon as these older people that are, influenced by advertisements and really watch cable news and believe it, you're right. They're gonna go away, and we certainly outnumber them. So.
Well, you talked about voting. That's I know that's one thing that we talked about on the last podcast, and I know it's something that you're very passionate about, is the idea that voting does matter. And it's amazing how low our voting numbers are with young people. It's almost unrealistic. And it seems like, and I forget who it was that said if voting mattered, they wouldn't let us do it. I don't know if that was Mark Twain. Sounds like a Mark Twain quote, but it was, it's kind of feels like that, because you look at, at least when it comes down to the president, and I know you haven't really hit on politics or what's going on with the debates, because you're kind of right. It does seem kind of pointless. But there's a lot of other things we can vote for, and there's a lot of other ways of making impacts. And so for a listener, somebody our age or younger who's listening and saying, well, my vote doesn't matter. Maybe when it comes down to the presidency, maybe they're right, because of the electoral votes and the fact that nobody gets a day off. It's not mandatory. So it almost seems like they're purposely trying to suppress people from voting. Like, the least people who vote, the easier it is to control those people who are voting. And but what would you say to somebody who says voting doesn't matter? And if it does, then how do I make a difference? And how do I go forward with trying to make an impact?
Well, I think one of the reasons that people are so disheartened is they say that there's so much money in politics and you can actually buy the politicians. But the thing is, all that money is going towards influencing your vote. So it's like, why would they be doing that if your vote didn't matter? So they do, like, the whole message of voting doesn't matter is something you're being told by the people who want you to stay home, because it's much easier for these people to like draw circles around the people that will vote for them or vote for the other guys, but like take their district based on historical voting data and say, this is the district I want. I'm really safe here. And as long as nobody else joins this party and screws it up for me, well, then it's all going to work. But the minute the rest of us participate, all of their calculations go out the window. All of their polls won't make any sense because they're polling the people who have voted in the past. And as long as us new people are convinced that it doesn't matter, well, then they're going to be right. But voting absolutely does matter. And I know that it's difficult on the presidential level and it feels rigged. And I think that's because the debate process is rigged. Absolutely. The Democratic and Republican Party created the Commission on Presidential Debates, which allows the candidates to, first of all, leave out anyone that is not a Democrat or Republican. So Jill Stein and Gary Johnson were on most of our ballots in 2012, but weren't allowed to participate because Barack Obama and Mitt Romney and their big two parties didn't let them. So the whole debate system is a big old mess. And if you can't debate, then how do people know about you? The presidential level is a mess. It is. Your vote still counts because Hillary was supposed to be the anointed one, not Barack Obama. So that just proves it right there. But you're also like, people that say that voting doesn't matter, you're forgetting about the smaller offices, which actually control your neighborhood much more. I mean, on the federal level, the House of Representatives, there's 700,000 people in every district. That's much smaller than the 300 million people we have in the whole country voting for president. So your vote counts a lot more. It can come down and has come down to like tens of voters. You can swing an election just by showing up. And then the other thing, the other thing that I hear all the time is, well, there's no one on my ballot that I want to vote for. Well, you still need to show up and vote for your ballot initiatives because those change how the system is run. So one of something that happened in California that I'm actually pretty pissed off about is that we elect our representatives through something called a top two primary system, which basically means that if I wanted to run for the House, I would have to be one of the top two people in the primary running against Democrats and Republicans and their name recognition and all their money and all that crap. And so they've limited every single district to only two people on the general election. And in 53 districts, we only had 4 people that weren't Democrats or Republicans. And so 96% of our options for the House of Representatives here in California for the last 2 elections have been Democrats or Republicans. Before this stupid law was passed, it was 66% Democrats and Republicans. It was a much more broad, group of choices. Well, this restrictive ballot initiative was passed in a June election, one that most people didn't show up to vote for in 2010, a midterm year. It was a constitutional amendment that changed our electoral process. So people that didn't like their choices or whatever and didn't show up, they allowed the system to be changed that way by just the few people that voted. I think we had a 30% voter turnout rate in that election, and it changed everything about our system. So even if you have to show up to even just stop stuff like this from happening. But there's much more on your ballot than just the president. And the midterm elections, in these elections where very few people are voting, your vote counts even more because other people sit it out. So, yeah, it definitely counts. It's all that counts.
But there is an argument to be made, for example, marijuana. I think for a long time before the states started kind of picking up on or changing their perspective on it, I think the people changed their perspective on it way before the states did, and it took a while and so I mean that's another perfect example of something that we couldn't even vote for, so it's a lot of things. It seems like you don't even have the opportunity to make an impact because they don't let us vote on some of the important issues. For example, Syria, as a society, I think we all decided we didn't want to go to Syria the first time he was trying to push us to get involved, and then he basically found a loophole by scaring the shit out of us a couple months later with the ISIS beheadings, and then now we're involved again. So it's like this thing. It almost seems like even if the people are saying one thing, they can find a way around it. For example, like you talked about the authorized, Congress hasn't declared war since Vietnam. They haven't authorized a war
since World War II.
Or World War II. Okay, yeah. So even longer, yeah. So I mean, it seems like, and what I'm trying to say is, it seems like if politicians want to get something done, even if the people are against it or for it, they can find a way around it. And then that kind of seems like it takes power away from the people because we're not paying attention to these things like you are. I mean, you're doing a lot of the hard work for us by keeping track of what's in these bills and what's really going on. The average person isn't, so they can put in these, like I forget which bill passed like right on Christmas or right before Christmas. It was
the government funding bill.
Yeah, and so they do tricky, like they know all the little tricks to kind of get us off guard and get what they want. And I think from the outside looking in, somebody who the average young person is looking at the whole system and they're saying the whole fucking thing's rigged. There's very little I can do, and I think that's why the libertarian movement got big during the Ron Paul era, and this whole idea of like just giving people freedoms and having small government. Maybe their economics was radical, and not everybody who believed in. For myself, even I believed in a lot of the libertarian ideas. I definitely didn't jump on board the economic thing of having complete free market. I think people have this debate where, government's corrupt or it's corporations are corrupt. And I think people are corrupt. I think there's always going to be an issue because it's not either or. It's the fact that who runs government? People. Who runs corporations? People. And anytime there's people who have a questionable moral compass or are capable of taking money to benefit themselves, then those people are going to get involved in all different types of jobs, and they're going to continue doing those things regardless. It's not corporations that make you evil. It's not the government itself that makes you evil. I think it's like I was saying, just people. So it is. I wonder if there's a question in anything I just said.
Well, I mean, you throw out a lot of examples there, and but you were basically saying that people feel disheartened because they look at the whole system and they think that the whole thing is rigged. And if you don't know anything about the details, I can see how you feel that way, because if you look at all of these different sections, and put them all together, I mean, we have problems with the environment, we have war issues, and we have electoral issues, and it does seem very overwhelming. But when you take the time to look at the details and you figure out how our system actually works, it was designed for times like these. I've said this before, the House of Representatives, we can fire every one of them every 2 years. It's a beautiful thing, so that when we have corrupt individuals, government isn't this thing that runs itself. It's run by people, actual people. We can name them. We know who they are. And we can take the ones that suck at their jobs and the ones who are taking enormous amounts of money from companies and then passing bills in those companies' favor. We can watch this stuff and pick whether or not these people are doing a good job. But when we turn and we just allow the system to run with these people and the people who are supporting them, then of course they're going to get reelected. If you're not happy with the system, you have to step up and change it. And your first example was marijuana. And you took it, like the way that I heard you talk about it was like, all the people really want marijuana, and why isn't it legal? And I get that on a federal level. But because people have showed up and, ballot access also isn't something that's controlled by some, giant monster at a pearly gate. This is people who go out and get petitions and get these things put onto the ballot. That's how the ballot initiatives happen. It's from people who are really active in the system, taking their time out of their day to make it happen. Once it's there, the reason that we have medical marijuana in, I think we're approaching half of the states. The reason we're on this path to legalization is because people have shown up and voted in favor of it. And here in California, I mean, we have medical marijuana. It hasn't become recreationally legal yet.
Which is ridiculous. It seems that that alone still seems ridiculous. Like the fact that we have to say it's medical marijuana when it's never been proven. And I don't even smoke weed. I mean, this is just, for me, it's more about the fact that I know there's people out in New Jersey. You hear these stories of people who have kids, and being a parent, I think it probably hits home a little more than it used to. But this idea that this child who their quality of life lacks all because they can't get this plant, which has had zero harmful effects, no side effects, and has never killed anybody in its lifespan in the history of the world, and can't get this plant all because of this old primitive opinion on marijuana, which was just years of propaganda that has just molded us into believing that marijuana is bad and alcohol is socially acceptable, even though obviously domestics, car accidents, alcohol has a huge hand in so many of bad things that happen in a day-to-day basis. So it seems like even marijuana, it took something to be so obvious, and I think this again has to do with just different generations. I think the people who grew up with access to internet, we just can't be lied to quite as easy than people before us. But it seems like it had to be so obvious and it had to be such a movement, because now I don't know what the polls are, but I'm pretty sure most people are all on board making marijuana legal, and the fact that we're not filling up our prisons, or so we don't fill up our prisons with nonviolent criminals and people who, I mean, the presidents have all done coke or marijuana. Most of them, I think the last 3 have admitted to doing both or at least one. And it's like they could have records. They could never have become the president because of trouble they got into or whatever, because of these.
But they did. Barack Obama was a huge stoner in Hawaii. I mean, it's hard to live in Hawaii and not be. And so that's not true. He did. And Bush did coke.
Oh, that's my point. They did do it. And what my point is that if it, like, they could have easily ruined their careers based on these ridiculous laws. And even then, like, it still takes time for these things to change. And it almost seems like it takes so much of a pull to actually get things to change, that a lot of times, like you said, you get people who do go out and get pushed for these ballots and these questions on these ballots. But even that takes a lot of our time. And it's like, and look at our lifestyles today. People are super busy. And it seems like, I mean, not to get all conspiratorial and by design, but there is something about marketing and materialism and us being obsessed with this idea of wanting more material things and chasing that dream of having the bigger house and nicer car, that we're so caught up in that nonsense that there's not as many people keeping track of what's going on or even have the free time to do those type of things. And even the fact that kids get in debt early, I mean, that's kind of I don't know if it's by design, but it definitely seems like it. You give kids credit cards at a young age, and then they're in debt for the rest of their lives. You go to college, you're in debt. And what happens when you're in debt? You're stuck working a job. You have very little freedom to actually move or take some time off and look for another job. You're stuck in this routine of working this job and trying to pay off your debt. And then you have a lack of people who are knowledgeable on these issues, people who have the free time to be an activist or knock on doors. And so it's.
You don't even have to do that. That's what's frustrating to me about our generation, is like, we're so concerned about student loan debt, as we should be, but we're not showing up to vote for the people that are saying that they're going to do something about it. We're sitting at home and saying our votes don't matter, and then we get all pissed off when nothing happens that benefits us.
Are you referring to Bernie Sanders or?
Well, Bernie Sanders is from Vermont and Elizabeth Warren is from Massachusetts, and they have very high voter turnout rates, which is why we have these people representing us federally that are doing good things on those levels, because the active states are actually showing up to vote and doing something good. But like California, I mean, I can tell you in the midterm elections, in the last midterm election, in between the ages of 18 and 22, we had an 8% turnout rate. So if those students are pissed off about their loans, how about the 92% of you who didn't bother to show up on a Tuesday? How about you guys show up and vote? Because otherwise, the people that don't care about the young people, they're never going to care because they know you're not going to show up and vote anyway. So that's the other thing. You have to send a message that your issues matter to the politicians, because if they can't count on your vote, why should they listen to you at all? And right now we have people that are in the, AARP, we have retirement communities that, I'll tell you, my 91-year-old grandmother, come hell or high water or like 9 feet of snow, that woman is getting her ballot. Like old people, they care about voting and they really hold on to their power, that they know that their vote matters. I mean, these are women that fought for the vote back in the 1920s. They don't take it lightly. My generation, it doesn't matter. It's not true. And so here in California, you saw people do the work. And this is what frustrates me, is you see people who take the time out of their lives because they believe in something like legalization of marijuana, and they get it on the ballot. And us lazy people were only asked to vote like once a year. They didn't vote for it. It didn't become legal. And then it becomes an excuse for people to say like, oh, well, see, nothing gets done. It's like, if you don't show up and vote for this stuff when you have the opportunity, you cannot bitch when the world doesn't change.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I definitely think that we can all do our part. I mean, I guess I was being the devil's advocate a little bit, because I think that...
I know, and it's good.
Yeah.
It's good that you're doing this, because a lot of people think the things that you're saying
are true, yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's good that you do that.
And I think sometimes, I mean, and I see, and because now with the, like you said, a lot of people, they don't pay attention to any of this until like it's the presidential debates, and then it's the elections, and it's like, besides like small town politics, nobody pays attention to that. Nobody votes for things and I always tell people, I'm like, that's where you can make the biggest impact, is locally, and really work your way up, and the smaller the town, the more of an impact you can make. And it seems like, but nobody pays attention to it until now, because now it becomes just entertainment. I mean, I'm a big UFC fan and sports fan, and some of these promo videos for the debates look like a UFC promo video. You know, it's like dun, 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 dun. You see them, all the politicians in like the shadow, and it's dark, and they're, you know, they look all serious. It's like it's all entertainment. It's like they're selling it because they know.
Reality show.
Yeah.
I call it the presidential pageant all the time, because it's really what it's become. And I think it's actually serving as one giant distraction. And I actually don't hold the people as responsible for this as I do the media, because our election cycle for the presidential election doesn't have to be 2 years long. They're choosing this. You know, they want us to be debating just these few people that are chosen by the Democratic and Republican parties. We have very little say. I mean, we get to vote in the primaries, but we just had Iowa vote. Here we are in 2016. We've had one of the smallest states in the country vote, and we've already lost so many presidential candidates that just because they didn't win Iowa, I mean, we had people drop out before Iowa even voted. So the votes are really all that matters, and they're all dropping out because the polls are telling them to drop out, you know? And it's like most of the country hasn't gotten to participate, but there's this entrenched idea of how campaigns are supposed to go. And
but how much is it because they're dropping out because they know the system's rigged? I mean, you look at
not rigged.
Well, it is. I mean, you look at
the parties are rigged.
The
system isn't rigged. You don't have to be a Democrat and Republican. The problem we're having is us stupid voters are only voting Democrat and Republican.
Well, you don't have to be a Democrat or Republican, but if you're Bernie Sanders and you want to actually get on these debates, you have to be a Democrat or Republican.
Yes, because the debates have been rigged by the Democratic and Republican parties. That is true. That is true. The system, that is a system that we're just allowing to continue. It doesn't have to be that way. And if we really wanted to hold, I mean, right now we're going through the primaries, which is controlled by the Republicans and the Democrats. And because the media they love the pageantry of it all. Like you said, it's a giant reality show. And so they're getting enormous ratings. And you also have to remember, all of the campaign money, not all of it, but a giant chunk of it goes towards advertising on TV.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so these same channels, they really want to continue this pageant, make it seem something dramatic for 2 years, because they're getting paid millions and millions and millions of dollars by the stars of this reality show. It's all a big business deal when it comes to the presidential level. And so there's far too many people in this country that turn on the news and expect news to be there. And, you know, I can't really fault them for that. And this is what they're being fed. So instead of talking about this authorization for the use of military force that literally authorizes limitless war, this should have been leading news. Instead, the day that I reported that, they were talking about Trump and Hillary. Trump and Hillary, Trump and Hillary. That's all you hear about. That's the media's fault. That is a corporate media. We no longer have, big stations. It used to be that if you had the television airwaves, you had to dedicate a certain amount of it to actual news, and you couldn't profit off the news. And as soon as it became profitable, then you ended up getting news as entertainment because the ratings mattered, Back in the day when we had real news on television, it was because it was required. And these stations always lost ratings during that time, but it wasn't about ratings. So we have rot in the media system that makes it feel like it's rot in the political system, but it's not, because you and I, if we can get enough signatures and get enough people to help us, we can get on the presidential ballot. We can run for president with no qualifications whatsoever. And it's much easier in some states. I mean, in Tennessee, you need 25 signatures. That's it. And you can get on the ballot for the House of Representatives. So it's like the barriers that we have in our head because of the pageantry on TV, when you look at the actual details and you learn about our system, the barrier is not nearly as high as we've convinced ourselves that they are. Real people can participate in this system without taking millions of dollars.
Well, I think you can participate. Now, how big of an impact you can make, I think, is where it gets questionable. Because you can get signatures, you can get on a ballot, but that's probably as far as you're going to get. Unfortunately, it's almost like you have to play within the guidelines. You have to, again, most people, I think, agree that Bernie Sanders, who has been independent most of his career, decided to be a Democrat because he knew the only way he was going to win or even have a chance to win is to get in these debates.
Debates.
And then he got on the debates, and now they're fucking with them more because now they put the debates on Saturdays in the beginning of the NFL playoffs or the last Saturday before Christmas.
But he's still tied.
Yeah,
He still died.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
Does it give you any hope?
It does. It absolutely does. But again, he's not the perfect politician either. I mean, you look at his foreign policy; it's very questionable. I mean, a lot of his domestic policies. A lot of people argue about how are you going to be able to pay for this. And you know what? I mean, it's almost like it seems like deja vu with Obama. Obama said all the right things. And I don't know how much of it was because we liked Obama or because when I say we, because I was one of those people who kind of thought that he might actually be different. And or how much
his nastiness came out in the primary with Hillary. I was over, and this might be a part of the reason why I knew this. I was traveling overseas during that primary. I was gone for 3 months, so I was getting the news in Europe, and you could totally see that he was just as corporate as she was. I mean, I still trusted him more than I trust her, and that I maintain that because she scares me. She's a warmonger, but yeah, you could see it back then. But the difference between Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders is that he's been a congressman for a very, very long time, and he has never changed his tune. With Barack Obama, we didn't know him that well. He was a senator for a couple of years, and then he became president of the United States. So we didn't have this, we didn't have all these records of how he's voted and how consistent he's been. But with Bernie Sanders, he's always been the same dude. So we generally know who he is. And the reason that I think Bernie's not talking about his foreign policy is because he's not a warmonger. He's not going to go out there saber rattling and saying we're going to bomb every country that has a terrorist in it. That's just not his thing. And unfortunately, in the media that we have, if you're not saying we're going to kill everyone in ISIS, you get bashed for that. So I think it's actually smart that he's kind of sticking back. And the only reason I know this is I've been paying attention to Congress for as long as I have. Bernie Sanders voted against the Iraq war. He voted for Afghanistan, but at the time Osama bin Laden was there. So, I mean, there was a reason. But, his first instinct is not to go to war. So, I mean, I think you can probably tell that out of the people that are left on those stages, because the parties are whittling them down. If I have to vote Democrat or Republican, I'm going to vote Bernie Sanders. But honestly, I voted for Jill Stein last time. And that's the thing. There's a lot of people that take these stupid political calculations. Other people are saying, well, third parties could never win, so you're wasting your vote. I think a wasted vote is voting for someone that you don't believe in. So if you don't believe in the Democrat, you don't believe in the Republican, show up and vote for the other person. Because then at least you can send the message that we are hungry for something other than Democrats and Republicans. And when you look at actual voter registration, year after year after year, there's more people dropping out of the big two parties and just registering as unenrolled. There's so many of us that are over their system, and it's their system. It's not the system. It's Democrats and Republicans we're pissed at. And they're the ones that are ruining the presidential race, know? It
is, but I mean, the system is also molded by those in power. I mean, the bills that are passed are, the way these debates are handled. I mean, all this stuff is I mean, you had Jack Abramoff on your podcast, which
and thanks by the way.
Yeah, no problem. And that was really interesting hearing that conversation. I think you probably came away feeling the exact same way I did, and it's it's weird because he's an interesting guy. He's outspoken enough, but he won't go all the way. It seems like he's still like on the team. It's like, I got caught, so I'll talk about the things I got caught doing, but I won't go any further than that. And so it's interesting. I mean, he's still one of those people who believe that, or I remember I had Roger Stone on, and I had a debate with him the first time I had him on. He was actually a lobbyist for Trump for his casino business, I believe, back in the 90s. And you probably know who he is. He's been on Jesse Ventura's show. He's been on a bunch of CNN, and he's just recently been I think he worked on the Trump campaign for a little bit, but he wrote a book on the Clintons, and so I had him on recently to talk about that, and before I had him to talk about a JFK assassination. But he's one of those people, like a lot of people believe, lobbying, money is free speech and you should have the right to do that. And I always make the debate, well, the more money you have, the louder a voice you have, so you're telling the average Joe that he doesn't have a voice, so all these things, like lobbying itself is
a lie.
But I mean, for example, lobbying, the fact that it's legal, it's almost like saying, well, the system's rigged because you're giving the biggest voice to those who have the most money, and they're going to have the most influence.
I got something different out of my conversation with Jack. He actually kind of made some sense to me, where it's not the lobbying that's really the problem, because those are people just going to the congressman and making an argument on one side or the other. It's the exchange of money. That's where the rot is. It's not necessarily that there's groups of people, because if you think about it, like there's people in Alaska, for instance, that can't just go to Washington and talk to a congressman because that's where congressmen spend most of their time. So to be able to hire a lobbying organization, say, can you go to this congressman's office and make this point for me? I don't think that that's as big an issue as the fact that these lobbyists are walking in with big fat donation checks. You know, I think it all comes down to the legal bribes that are campaign contributions. I think that's the real rot in the system, is that the people that want to take the bribes have made them legal.
Why would any politician listen to a lobbyist if they didn't have an incentive to do so in the first place? In other words, lobbying wouldn't be effective if you didn't have money. So if you took away the money from lobbying wouldn't exist.
Well, I'm okay with that.
I am too, but I definitely.
But here's technically, lobbying could be me going to my congressman with a couple of my neighbors and saying, we want this thing done. I mean, that is lobbying. Lobbying is just making a case. It's the money part of lobbying that makes us all feel so icky. And it's why Jack got in trouble. He took it too far with, taking these people out and winning their good favor, so that when he did say, hey, so hear me out on this. These people were more receptive to it because they had just gone golfing with him or gone on a vacation with him. The money was used to build friendships so that his words had more weight. But my favorite thing that Jack told me is that, not only do our votes matter, but he told me, and I've played this clip so many times, but that calling and emailing makes a huge difference with our politicians. And that was so nice to hear, because again, the only thing that these politicians need to keep their jobs is our votes. And that's what matters at the end of the day, is the votes. And so if you actually take the time to call these people and say, hey, by the way, my vote is dependent on you doing, this, and this, especially in the House of Representatives. Because again, there's only 700,000 that they have to, that's their pot of people, and they have to get as many as they can to vote for them. It has real power. So if calls and emails have power, of course your vote has power. And we were told this by Jack Abramoff himself. When I look at the rot in the system, it's the money. It's not the people contacting their congressman.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, but you can't eliminate money, which means it's
you can. Well, sure you can. You can make it illegal to give a politician any money. You can.
Well,
you can't.
Well, technically, super PAC is an indirect way of giving a politician money, isn't it?
Sure, we can make those illegal too. We can just make it that because here's the thing, it was really hard at a certain time in our history, not that long ago. I'm talking even 1990s. You needed to collect money because you needed a way to tell the people in your district or on the presidential level in the country that you were running. So therefore, you had to get on television and you had to get on the radio. And mailers were important because you needed to give people, something in writing saying, this is what I believe in. Now we have the internet. So it's not necessary anymore. We have a communication tool that just about everybody uses, and you can give people information and let them know you're on the ballot without taking cash. It's no longer necessary to pay the networks to broadcast your message. And so now that we do have this mass communication tool, the money isn't necessary. But so much of the common wisdom has become this race for money. And it's become so accepted by the people in the media and the people participating. Because remember, mainstream media is participating in this by being the ones that take the money. The money goes from whoever to the politician. The politician gives it to the media in the form of ads. So they're complicit in this. And they're the ones who are telling us that it's all about the money. That's another big lie. Because when I go to vote, I can tell you the way that I do it is I go on the internet, I look at the person's campaign website. I look at YouTube videos of the debates. I don't even need them to be on television because I don't have cable. If they send me anything in the mail, it goes immediately in the recycle bin. I don't even look at it. And then lawn signs. Who needs a lawn sign? And other than that, the only things that they're spending money on are campaign events, which are fundraisers. So if you're not raising funds, poof, you don't need that anymore. And then there's travel. Travel is necessary on the presidential level. And kind of in the Senate level too, because in a state like California, you do need to get around. But for congressional districts, you need a car. That's it. So it's really not necessary to collect a bunch of money. At least not in the form of cash. If you wanted volunteers to volunteer to, drive a bus or something like that, we can find a way to have a system or have if you get a certain number of signatures, you get this much money and that's it. That's all you're allowed to spend. So here you go. If you need to spend this on travel on the Senate level, we'll give you $500,000. On the congressional level, you get $50,000, and may the best man win, because at least that's fair. So for whatever money we need, we can pick whatever number makes sense. But we don't need to have a system like this. This is corrupt to the core.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think the Young Turks are doing something like that. They're trying to get money out of politics, and I know a lot of different groups are. And yeah, I think that's definitely, in theory, the root cause of everything. It seems to be the issue. I mean, if you look, but again, I wonder how much of it's so deep rooted, and voices like yourself or mine, they're going to be heard, and we're going to, and maybe it's just going to take a generation change for things that happen, because fans of yours and fans of mine, people are listening to this, and they're eventually going to be the CEOs of companies. They're going to be the next people running for a political office, and we're changing their consciousness. We're changing the way they look at things. And I think also people are automatically, and I've said this a bunch of times on the podcast, so forgive me for listeners who've heard me say this a bunch of times, but I think the younger generation, we're losing the money's losing its power, because we're used to getting shit for free. We're used to getting, stuff that you had to pay for before, knowledge, music, entertainment, movies. You can get almost all that shit for free now. So you do things more because of other factors, like it makes you happy, or you want the free time, or you enjoy it, or whatever. And it's not based on, well, how do I make the most money? Because money's losing its power a little bit, which is probably why a lot of podcasters have the recurring issue with having 1 billion downloads and 2 people donated, to the podcast, because I think that it's just so hard to get people to pay for stuff, even if they're using it and enjoying it, because we're so used to getting so much for free. And I think those are the pros and cons. I've had musicians on, and I had Burton C. Bell, who's a singer of Fear Factory, this metal band I grew up listening to, and that's one thing you could tell really just rubs him the wrong way, the fact that people are getting shit for free, and it's hurting the music that you love, and I wonder if it's going to take people to get creative and find just different ways of trying to make money or trying to keep a business going. I mean, you look at YouTube, you look at Google. I mean, these are huge companies that give you free services, but they find other ways of making a profit and continue going. So it definitely seems like as that transition continues, and as money becomes less powerful and it loses a little bit of its strength, I wonder what the future politician is going to be like. Maybe.
Well, it's already starting to happen, because if you look at Iowa, Jeb Bush came in, damn near last. He got 1 delegate, and only Chris Christie and some dude I've never heard of got 0. So he came in second to last, despite collecting over $135 million. It didn't matter. People showed up and voted. That's what mattered. And I think a lot of that is because, the money made a big difference. I mean, I kind of already said this, but the money made a big difference when you needed television and radio. And now that we're not listening to it, I mean, when it comes to audio, I'm listening to podcasts. And when it comes to television, I'm watching Netflix and chilling. I'm not even getting the ads anymore. And so it's going to become less powerful, because that's what it was needed for. And those things are no longer needed. But you're right. It's our generation stepping up and basically acting like adults, and, taking the time to vote, taking the time to run, especially in the states where running is not that difficult. And my next episode, the one I'm in the middle of recording, is about how difficult it is from state to state. I mean, North Carolina is one of the most difficult states I've ever seen. You have to get, to get on the ballot, you have to get between 15,000 and 25,000 signatures, plus pay $1,740. That's bizarre. But like I said, Tennessee, 25 signatures, you're on. So there's a big range, but what I see is a system that is being, an electoral system anyway, that's being rigged by the big 2 parties. But they're not done yet. They're not even close. And the more I learn, the more I've realized that there really are holes in it if the voters are willing to show up and support you. And a lot of people get really discouraged when they see the low voter turnouts historically, especially with people under 40. I see that as an amazing untapped voting bloc that is ready to vote for someone that they believe in. They just haven't found that person. And I honestly think it's just going to take someone being first, who figures out how to run on the internet without taking money and gets into Congress. That's just going to kind of show, like, here's a rough draft of how you did this. This is how I did it. You try it too. And as soon as one person pays it off, I honestly think, like, getting someone who's not corrupt into Congress, who can, I mean, I'm having fantasies of myself doing it, might get one person in there that when a giant government funding bill with a surveillance bill attached is happening, someone who will go to the floor of the House and yell about it and say, this is happening right now, this is unacceptable, who will go on every television station, call every journalist they know, someone who's there to point out what's going wrong. And then when you get a few more people that get in without taking the money, well, then you've got a coalition. So yeah, you might have, out of 435, you might have, 420 people who are Democrats and Republicans, but now you've got these 15 troublemakers. And we kind of saw it with the Tea Party. And the Tea Party, I've got to tell you, they're crazy on some things. I mean, the reputation is deserved, but on other things, they're not. So when we're, bombing a country that none of us have approved of, it's the Tea Party saying no to this. And it was the Tea Party guys that when the surveillance bill was attached to the government funding bill, it was Justin Amash who literally ran into a hearing at the end and said, by the way, this is in here. So you can't tell me that you don't know about it anymore. I just told you. And so you get these wild cards in Congress. They can actually make a real difference. And it only takes one to prove it's possible. And when I look at the rules, when I actually take state by state and go and say, how is this done? It's not that hard when you actually look at the details. It's not impossible. It feels impossible because we're told it's impossible. It is not by a long shot. The key is getting people to support you, getting people to show up and vote.
But haven't we had guys like Rand Paul and Dennis Kucinich who they have been outspoken and they have tried to, ruffle some feathers, and even they are, denied in many circumstances. I mean, people who, even Ron Paul and Rand Paul, they both voted against wars, but eventually, the corporations who are making money off it will have enough politicians in their pocket to get involved. And so it seems like corporations are always going to exist, so they're always going to find a way to influence things. That's what it seems like to me. Would you agree? Or
Which is, it's natural, but they don't have to have as much influence as they do. And the reason they have the influence is that they're able to donate, millions and millions of dollars to these politicians. They are legal bribes. And, politicians, Hillary was saying it last night, like, oh, it doesn't affect me. Sure, it does. If someone gives you $1 million, you're not going to go, full blown against them. You're just not. And so it's the money, the reasons that corporations have so much power. But I mean, the two examples you just gave me, Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul, because Rand's a mess on a lot of different levels.
Yeah, that's true.
But Ron and Dennis Kucinich, they both made it into Congress. For many years, they were in Congress. And Dennis Kucinich would still be there if the Republicans hadn't redistricted in a way that put him against Marcy Kaptur, who is just as good a congressman as he was. So by doing that, he got booted because of, a stupid rule that can be changed that allows all of the states to draw their own districts. I mean, that's a bad idea. It should be an independent commission. That can be changed. But anyway, that's why he's no longer in Congress. Ron Paul chose to resign, and they also were running in a different time. We're at the point now that everybody has the internet, and this is something that's happened over the last 10 years. This is new. We're just figuring out how to deal with it. And where they got screwed was in the debates. Once again, it comes back to on the presidential level, they got kicked out of the debates, and therefore most people thought that they stopped running. They never stopped running, but they were kicked out by the Democratic and Republican parties. And so until we as voters are willing to say, if you run third party, you have my vote, despite what anybody says. Because, I mean, I have a really, really smart friend in Florida who she won't vote third party. She's like, it's just dangerous after Nader. And it's like, it's dangerous to keep telling the Democrats and Republicans that they have our support no matter what. Because then they collude on things like trade agreements. They collude on things like war. I mean, the things that they agree on, they collude on allowing bribery to be legal. These two parties are too similar on too many things. And so it really, a lot of it has to do with us voters not being willing to tell them that enough is enough.
Now, when she says it was, she was referring to Ralph Nader. What did she mean? Like just the fact that voting for him meant it was just a lost vote? What a lot of people said at that time.
Sure. Yeah. So if you voted for Nader, you were saying basically you were taking votes away from Gore, and that's how Bush became president. I mean,
and that's why he had a lot of people pushing back, telling him not to run, and he. Like you said, the least of two evils is still evil, and he felt like he should have ran anyways. And
I agree with him.
I absolutely too.
And if more people had the balls to vote for him, it might have been a very different country. We definitely wouldn't be talking about the TPP right now.
Well, look at Ross Perot. Ross Perot was talking about NAFTA in the 90s. He paid out of his own pocket to talk about it. And But that's, and that's the thing, even the TPP, you look at how much power and influence they have, where, I mean, it's so obviously corrupt, this bill, and everything from hiding it from the people to, who's involved in writing it and who can see it, who can't. Like, there's so much of that, but you're right. You have to start somewhere. And like you said, you have to work your way up and get a couple people in there who are willing to ruffle some feathers and stir things up. And then eventually, like you said, as the younger generation comes. But it does seem like behind the scenes, there's always going to be the same Kissingers and the same advisors and people who constantly have pull and influence on decision making.
But that's not necessarily true, because the people that, remember, these are people that are extending those invitations. So if it wasn't John McCain who was deciding who gets to testify, Henry Kissinger isn't getting invited. If Elizabeth Warren is in charge of that committee, Henry Kissinger is not getting a phone call. If I'm in charge, Henry Kissinger is not getting a phone call. So it all depends on the people we're allowing to stay in power. And if we keep electing people that have been in power for 30 years, and there's a lot who have been in power my entire life. That's a key part here. We're not having turnover in Congress, even though we can vote out the entire House every 2 years. We're just not doing it. And so if we don't show up to vote and kick out the people that are not doing a good job and who are still counting on people who have been discredited 8 ways from Sunday, that's on us. The only way that they can get reelected time after time is if we keep voting for them. And right now we have far too many people that are either staying home or voting on party lines because they think they belong to one of these two parties, which are misrepresenting themselves to the people. Hillary Clinton is such a good example of this. Because I watched, as much as I could stand of the debate last night, and she's pretending she's Bernie Sanders. She's pretending she's going to go after the banks, even though we know she's taking millions of dollars to talk to them. She's just lying her pants off. And then when it came to the TPP, I remember 2012, I was doing Congressional Dish. I remember that she went on a world tour with Barack Obama selling the TPP. She was the Secretary of State. She was involved in the negotiations. I have recordings of her speeches saying, this is a great trade agreement. You should support it. She's talking to the president of Singapore. These are very important people. And she's there selling it. She tells the American people that she had nothing to do with it. And yet there's plenty of people that are going to vote for her because they feel it has to be either a Democrat or a Republican, that there's no other options. And until we break that paradigm and just tell them that you have other options, we're going to be in big trouble.
Well, it's amazing when you look back at old debates and you look back at, even Bill Clinton talking about the World Trade Organization and adding China to it. And there's a pretty good documentary called Death to China, which I believe Martin Sheen narrates it. And it tells the whole story. And, in talking about NAFTA, it seems like it's the same thing. It's history repeating over and over again. It's just different characters, and it's just
same characters.
Or a lot of times the same characters. Yeah, well, that's true too. A lot of times it is the same characters. At least in this case, it's Clintons and more Bushes. But it definitely seems like it's. And so it seems like we just constantly get tricked. We get tricked into the same mistakes, the same things, the same war. Look at the Syrian war. We're involved there. We should have an uproar. It wasn't that long ago. We just got involved in Iraq. We took down a government, basically had a hand in creating ISIS because of it. We got involved in Afghanistan. We got involved in Afghanistan and being the longest running war in American history. We've gotten involved in all, and then they use tactics to scare us, and then and that's the thing. That's another thing that you've talked about on your podcast, which is interesting, is how they use, from my perspective, I see how they use tactics to get us involved in wars, but you see it from your perspective, how they get bills to get passed, right? They use the scare tactic of when people are panicking or they don't have time to read a bill, or they scare somebody by saying, if you don't pass this bill, this is going to happen, which I think that happened with the bailouts with the banks and stuff like that. That was a big part of it, was just telling politicians, hey, if you don't pass this, then we're going to have the biggest economic collapse in the history of the world. And
same with the Patriot Act. If you don't do this, we're going to have another 9/11.
Yeah, and that's another tricky, clever move. It's how they name these bills, right? That's another thing you see a lot, is these clever names for the bills. It's like
USA Freedom Act.
Exactly. Yeah, which I think you just did a podcast about that recently too, right?
I did, yeah, because they basically just privatized the storage of all the data that they're mining.
yeah. So
it's also horrible and cynical, but I think one of the reasons why I'm able to laugh it off at this point, I mean, I thought that this should depress me more than it does. But the reason it's not is because of the reaction that people are having to actually getting this information. They want it, like people really want it and they're really thankful, and people are not stupid and they do want to get involved. They are willing to call their congressman. It's just a matter of getting the information out there. And that's our biggest struggle, but that's also where we control things, because now with social media, you can kind of be your own newspaper. You can use your Facebook feed to share the interesting episodes and articles and, whatever you find. You can be the filter for other people. And the more people that we have doing that, the more information is being shared, the harder it is for them to do something like, try and take over a country and not have us know about it. Some little pain in the ass here, they were getting away with it. I told 7,000 people, and counting. So, I mean, we now have the power to spread the information that the media has financial reasons for not telling us. The NBC network has been connected to General Electric forever, which is a defense contractor. So it's like they have financial reasons to not only make the presidential pageant go on forever, but to also help the pharmaceutical industry, because when they go to commercial break and you have a Cialis commercial, they got paid for that, so they're not going to tell you these things about the anthrax vaccines and the hepatitis C vaccine, which costs $1,000 a pill. They're not financially motivated to give you these stories, because they're going to lose sponsors if they do. And so now that people like you and I are able to be the media, and you don't even have to be a podcaster. Like I said, you can use your social media to be a newspaper. Now that that's really happening, we're figuring out how to do it, and more people are involved. Like, I have so much hope in our future, because right now I just like to see us stop the bleeding, but I honestly think that we can, and we will, as soon as we show up to vote and outnumber the people that are continuing this behavior.
Well, you brought up MSNBC. Phil Donahue, who had the highest rated show on MSNBC, was anti-Iraq war, was, basically being anti-war is pretty, it's pretty liberal. It's a liberal thing to do, and he gets cut, and Amber Lyons, when she worked for CNN, and there's just, and then that documentary Out Fox, which is obviously biased because they're trying to bash Fox News, but there's a lot of good stories from memos and stuff on how to swing stories or what words to leave out while reporting on a story, and all the stuff that molds, what they're putting out there. And I think it's silly that they're called news organizations. I believe Fox News, I might get this wrong, but I believe Fox News couldn't get, there's some license or a permit or something in Canada you needed to right? And they
couldn't get it because they weren't real news.
Exactly, yeah, because their opinion. And I think what people don't realize, when you watch your local news, and even though local news is pretty much fear-mongering too, because it just says car accident, stabbing, home invasion, and just so you keep watching and be like, oh, is it happening in my neighborhood? And
if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah. But at least that's closer to news, because they're just reporting it, compared to saying, this is my opinion on what happened, and not really telling. And then it says news on the bottom, so then you kind of assume, oh, this is news, and you don't realize it's opinion. So it is confusing people, but I do think there is hope. And I've had a lot of libertarians on, and people who believe in smaller government, and people who are socialists, and a little bit of everything. And it's I love having people on with different opinions, and I've had a lot of anti-government people on, so it's nice to get a different perspective. And that's why I was being a little bit of a devil's advocate, because I think it's important for people to see the importance of trying to change things and trying to make a difference and actually getting involved. And I think a lot of times we just talk about how corrupt things are, that we forget that we can actually change it, and even if it means starting at a place where it has a smaller impact, kind of working our way up. So I think. Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to be easy.
No,
I'm not saying that's going to be easy, but it's absolutely possible. I think it's important too that what we're doing also is exposing how bullshitty the news is. Because with the local news, do you know about native advertising?
No.
Oh, this is some bullshit. So, the local news every year will have some kind of story about, Starbucks pumpkin latte. And then everyone will get all excited because they have like a candy cane one over Christmas. Those are paid advertisements, but they're made to look like news stories. And you'll see that all the time. So anything that's about a product, these are companies that are paying local news stations. The thing is, it's going national. So a lot of times we think that a story is a local station because you see like, hi, I'm your local person. I'm introducing this story. And then it goes into someone else's voice that does the actual reporting. And it's not about your actual community. It's just more of like a broad, like, here's a story. Those local news stories are being pushed to all of these different affiliates. So like the ABC affiliate will show the same story to everyone in the country. So you think it's local, but it's not. It's paid and it comes from like Big Daddy ABC up on top. So yeah, just from top to bottom, corporate media is just bought and paid for. And I think the more people are made aware of this, they can watch the news differently. They can watch it for the entertainment that it is. You know, I watched the presidential debate last night, not to learn anything, but to just kind of, you know what was being said. But I knew that, you know, I also wanted to see the commercials. NBC had a commercial for Hillary in the middle of the debate. You know, like that is so corrupt. And at this point, I'm at the point where I can laugh at it. But I went through the stages of grief because you're in denial. You're like, there's no way this is happening. Then I got really, really mad about it. Then I was like, well, maybe it's okay. Maybe it's not. That's the bargaining stage. And so I'm finally getting towards like ultimate acceptance and where it's like, okay, now I feel like I can do something about it. But figuring this out and feeling like here I am all these years watching the news and trying to be informed. And I've been bullshitted for so long. Like you feel like a sucker. You know, like, why am I so dumb? How did I believe this for so many years? It's a really painful process for people to go through. And because of that, I think a lot of people push it off as long as they can. That denial stage can be really powerful. But once people break through, once there's enough people that they trust, where it's like, okay, I have to believe it now. Once you get people to that point, then they're willing to be helpful in the process. But I think we still have a lot of people in this country that haven't got there. So it's important for people to do things like you're doing and saying like, you know, this is not legit and you'd have to point it out. And, you know, we're lucky to be in positions where we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like that quote, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. And I think that's a huge issue with people. I think when you try to tell somebody that the way they look at the world is wrong or everything they thought was true is untrue, I think first reaction is denial and you don't want to believe it. And I think that's a lot of times that's what ends up happening. You tell somebody who grew up watching Fox News as a Republican and a child of probably Republican parents, and then all of a sudden you say, hey, it's all bullshit, then first reaction is going to be, oh, right, wait, I think you make a point. First reaction is going to be like, oh, no, that's not true. Are you kidding me? MSNBC is way more liberal than they are conservative or whatever. So those are the type of conversations I'm getting into. So I think it is important. And I think what you said, too, about social media, there's so many times I've shared things on Facebook or Twitter that I think nobody's paying attention to. Then I'll be hanging out with some buddies and like, oh, I ended up reading that article or watching that documentary or listening to that podcast that you shared. And I'm like, well, why the fuck didn't you like it, asshole? I'm like, it's one of those things where it's like, it drives me crazy because it's like, if you like something, that little act of just hitting like, it just, the potential of somebody else seeing it is going to be a little bit better. So you hope they do that, and, but yeah, I mean, I think that what ends up happening, what ends up happening is my wife or I will put a picture of my son and get 1,000 likes in 2 seconds, and then I'll put like the cure to cancer, and nobody will pay any attention to it. It's like, so it's amazing the things that get attention. So a lot of times it ends up provoking you not to share the story because it's like, oh, nobody's paying attention anyways. But I think that we shouldn't think like that. We should share things that are interesting. Your podcast, any episode people find interesting, share it. If you find thought provoking at any documentary, article, whatever. And I think that little act is going to slowly change perspectives and consciousness and opinions. And like you said, so this idea that even the busy person that we talked about who feels like they don't have a lot of ability to try to make a difference, that little act of sharing something you find interesting can go a long way. And
you never know what the light bulb is that takes someone from denial to like, okay, I get it. And it could be something subtle. One of the things for me was the documentary Outfoxed, because I had spent during the Iraq War, during that whole run up, I was living in Germany. And so it wasn't until I saw Outfoxed, which a lot of people was like, oh yeah, everything in that is so obvious. But when I saw it, I was able to see what everyone in the States was seeing when the war started, which was like shock and awe, this is amazing. And they had a countdown, like, so I didn't know this was happening. But if just like a random person, they probably wouldn't have shared that because it's now become just, oh, Outfoxed is so old, whatever. But you never know what someone hasn't seen and what's going to be like a life-changing thing for them and why it's going to be that way. You don't know what other people's experiences are. So if you found something interesting, chances are someone else might too.
And that's an important point, because I think that sometimes it does take one article, one documentary. So these things will end up building up. You have one person telling you that, you know, the system's rigged, or the media's all bought and paid for, or whatever, and then you'll deny it, but it's in the back of your head, and you're planting that seed, and then all it takes is that one documentary or that one podcast or that one conversation that finally things become clear, and you're like, holy shit, maybe I have been wrong. You know, maybe this is the way things are. And I think that we all have had documentaries or podcasts or whatever that has contribute to that change in our perspective. And you, like you said, you never know what it's going to be and which one's going to do it. So it's important to share those things. And even Outfoxed, I mean, I talked to a lot of people who've never seen the documentary, you know, and then you get,
Wow.
yeah. And I talked to some people who think it's all propaganda from the other side, you know, and I'm like, well, even, and that's the thing, like anytime somebody shares like a conservative website's article, I'm kind of skeptical of it. But like I always tell people, even in like a biased opinion, there might be some truth in it. You know, there might be a hint, even if you know, feel like, okay, Outfoxed was just basically picking on Fox News when MSNBC is clearly just as bad. But if you just ignore that opinion and you just look at the information, it obviously had some really good, strong evidence that it was biased and they were trying to fearmonger and scare people and all that stuff. So I think that even if it's because I think a lot of times people dismiss anything that comes from somebody they disagree with. So it's like, oh, I don't agree with that person, so I'm just going to dismiss everything they're saying. But I think that there's things you can take away from many different people. Even if you disagree with them 100% of the time, there might be 1% where, you know what, like they make sense there, and there might be sharing something that makes sense. So I think it is important to get different perspectives and different opinions and not dismiss everything just because it's coming from a side that you don't agree with. So yeah, I mean,
well, especially where the sides are such nonsense.
Yeah,
you know, we're told that liberal and conservative means these things, and there's so many good conversations that devolve into discussing those labels. It makes me crazy. But when you look at the governing, those two sides don't make any sense. Because there's things that like people who are liberal and super conservative, like war. You know, there are very, very liberal people and very, very conservative people who are working together to stop the next Syria war, you know? And then when it comes to trade agreements, you know, you would think that one side would be for them and one would be against them. Like, no, they're working together. So we're also like the whole two-sided thing. And you're right, one side will dismiss this side. Anyone who identifies really with one team or the other is very much ready to dismiss everything that's said by the other team, but the teams are bullshit.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's a big part of it too. You think you believe something that's not how the world is actually working. Well, and it's so everywhere. And I think that's what's tough too, is that when you hear what's actually going on, and it's been really tough for me because I was raised Republican. So it's like, you're told that the world is one way, and then you look at stuff and it's like, but how can this whole, you know, meme of the two sides be so wrong so consistently? It's really hard to wrap your head around it. I mean, I still struggle with it. And so that's going to be our biggest challenge, is to try and break down the two-team thing, because it's not accurate.
Well, I think the teams, they used to represent ideologies that you agreed with. Like back in the day, it's like I vote Republican because I agree with these Republican views. But today, a team only represents the team. All you're doing is picking a team on the basis of just wanting to protect and be for that team, because they don't consistently vote on any ideologies. I mean, it doesn't seem like ideology is a motivation at all. I had Thaddeus Russell on he wrote the book, The Renegade History of the United States, and he's a historian, and we had this debate about what's the biggest influence. Is it ideology or money? And I tend to believe money. He tends to believe ideology. And there's just so many examples of politicians voting against their own political party's ideology based on where they're getting money or who's influencing them, that it's just hard for me to believe that any of these guys believe any of the shit that's coming out of their mouth. I mean, from your perspective and paying such close attention to this, which one do you think is a bigger influence? Do you think some of these people are
money?
Absolutely, right? Yeah,
Without a doubt. I mean, you have these people that preach the free market all the time, and yet they're passing bills that rig the market for one industry or the other. And yeah, I see it constantly, where it's like they'll have these giant tax breaks for corporations, and it's like, that's rigging the market. That's not free at all. So yeah, I see it all the time. The ideology thing is lip service, and it's a way to win elections because they have the people pretty well. I mean, it's becoming less influential, the two teams, but the people that are on them, they really believe it. It's like, our side's gonna win and that's it. And those people that are susceptible to that, they're sold on candidates because of what they say about abortion and about like these social issues about gays that can get married, and that's what they're all debating. When you watch Congress, it's not being legislated. They're not doing that. They're doing favors for the banks. The 114th Congress is all about favors for the banks. They were doing the cybersecurity legislation, which was actually surveillance legislation. I mean, they're doing things that are not being debated by either of the two sides. And it's being done bipartisan. So, I mean, if you look at what you think is happening and then you look at reality, it's not going to match. And I think that's something that's really difficult for people. And so they like to just stay with the team thing. Like, oh, if a Democrat wins, I win. And if a Republican wins, I win.
Yeah, but, it drives me crazy when people are like, oh, we have to win. It's like, it's not you. Like, they're not on your team. You might be on their team. They're not on your team, And no. It's so silly. And even during these like speeches where you see Trump or you see whoever, and after everything they say, they clap like they just said something profound. It's like, oh yeah, absolutely, we're gonna do this, or like you made a perfect example. I don't know if it was on my podcast or in this interview or on one of your podcasts about them constantly bringing up ISIS during these debates because they just want to rally people, and it's something that they can get everybody excited about. I mean, these guys, no offense, but most of these guys were probably, not jocks or athletes in the high school, and they're going around acting like they're going to kick ass, like they're the ones who are physically dominant alpha males who are going to go around kick ass. And it's like, you guys aren't going to do anything. Like, first of all, there's a lot more that's going to happen afterwards than just say, hey, we're going to go kill ISIS. Like, there's a lot of strategy that's involved in doing that, and there's a lot of backlash in doing that, a lot of and who's going to be in power after you take down Assad or after you remove ISIS? All these other things that we don't consider. But like you said, it's all this team thing where it rallies the team and it gets people going, and it's very Hitler-ish, where it's just like screaming out and getting people worked up, and it's just it drives me crazy because these same people that I feel like are, like you said, susceptible to these type of these rallies and group thinking are the same people who join cults. I mean, it's the same idea. It's the same people who are part of Jonestown or whatever, or a religion for Mormons or whatever. Not to bash any religion, but a lot of these people, you see similarities in. They need to find. They're either. They have some story where they were never accepted and now they feel accepted, or they're orphans or whatever, where they finally feel like they're a part of something. And I think that it's a very powerful thing, this being a part of something. I'm sure you enjoy music as much as I do, and I've been to many concerts where my co-host Dave, who does the show with me sometimes, he brought me to a Pearl Jam concert, and I'm not a huge Pearl Jam fan. It was actually Eddie Vedder's did acoustic show with when he played the ukulele, believe it or not, and so everybody there just seemed like it was a religious experience because I wasn't a fan of his music. I was in the outside looking in, so everybody got caught up in the energy in the room, and everybody was standing up and like singing together, and I'm like, holy shit, I feel like I'm at like a Christian church right now, and I think there's something about getting these people rally together and feeling like you're part of this team and you really believe in this team. And Jack Abramoff was a part of the Young Republicans, and he was another guy at a young age, joined this team and just was passionate about it. And even he did things based on money more than ideology, so I think it's a powerful thing. I think that as media their strength weakens and people stray away from that, and they can go on the internet where, for better or worse, you can get many more opinions and many more perspectives. The good thing is there's not a distinct one team or the other team to pick from. It's not just Republican or Democrat, and these are two teams. You have many different teams, so maybe you'll run into more different perspectives that might change your mind on things and be much harder to kind of brainwash you to be a part of something. But yeah, that group thinking is scary, because when you meet somebody who's truly passionate about being a progressive or being a liberal or being a libertarian or being a conservative, like they are, I mean, it's very hard to pry through that and get them to see anything outside of that perspective. And I think it was Bill Burr who said, the internet is just youagreewithme.com. It's this idea that everybody just goes on websites that agree with their already established opinion. So you're not really looking for information that contradicts your opinion. You're looking for information that defends your opinions. So then when you get in that debate with your buddy, you got some shit to throw at them, and it just so I think it's a huge issue. But and
I find that the pronouns are it's easy for me to tell what kind of person I'm talking to, if they're saying I or if they're saying we. Because at a podcast movement last year, and I'm not entirely proud of this, but I got a little too drunk and got into a conversation with two libertarians. And they kept just saying, like, well, we believe this and we believe that. And I'm like, who the fuck is we? Like, there's three of us talking right now. Like, who are you talking about? They're like, well, libertarians. I'm like, you don't speak for everyone who uses that label. Like, what do you think about this? And the one guy just kept looking at the other for answers. And it was just like, no. Ignore him. What do you think? And that's incredibly frustrating. But you're right. Like, this one guy, I mean, you could tell he was a fan of the dude I was talking to. He just wanted so badly to be accepted by this libertarian podcaster that he was willing to say anything that this guy agreed with. And it was just we. And then, but one thing that I slightly disagree with is I don't necessarily think that this is brainwashing all the time. And it's like, I know I'm thinking of people in my own life that are very, very smart people, but also prescribe to the we thing. I think it's also laziness. So they want to be aware of politics and they want to have an opinion. They want to be involved in these conversations, but they don't really know what they're talking about. So it's easier to talk about, kind of surface level ideological stuff and pick a team and just be like, well, this is what I think. And so it's easier to have a conversation and be like, okay, which side am I on this based on, this is what a Democrat is, or this is what a Republican is. You can figure out what box that goes in. And it's like, okay, I'm going to argue this. So I think it's also some ideological, nap taking that happens with it. I think once people start really thinking about issues, it becomes a lot harder to fit everything you think into one box or another, because then, you just realize they don't fit. But if you're not thinking about it that hard, you can put everything you think into one box,
Yeah, and even these, like you said, libertarians and progressives, even though I think that they're great alternatives to conservatives and liberals, they also have this group thinking where, it, like you said, it's we, and it's like, oh, and like you said, you don't represent all. A lot of these ideologies, you can look at them from different perspectives too. There's a lot of people, I mean, Ayn Rand, who's a very well-known philosopher, there's people who debate her views, and it's a very popular book, Atlas Shrugged, and her philosophies even today are being debated by a lot of different conservatives and Republicans. They'll debate, she really meant this, did she really, So I think that even in these philosophies, there's wiggle room where there's not a clear cut, established, this is what it actually means. Like, it's very subjective and similar to religion, the same way that somebody can read the Quran and blow themselves up, or somebody can read the Quran and see it as a very peaceful book and use it as a moral compass, the same way Christians use their their holy book or any other religion. So I think that it is perspective, and I think anytime you say we, I think it automatically tells me who you are, and very quick in the conversation you can kind of be like, okay, I know who I'm talking to. And some people are just too much work. I mean, I guess if you have a couple of drinks, you might be more open to debating them. But I've definitely met some people where I'm like, this is going to be way too long of a night, and I'm not even getting, I'm just going to, like, they'll say something so confident, just like, oh, Trump will make a great president or whatever. I was getting a haircut yesterday, and this guy just came out and just like in the barbershop just randomly said, he's like, I hope you guys are voting for Trump or something like that. Or he's like everybody else is retarded, or, and I'm just like, I was so willing to, like, I wanted to say something, and then I'm like, you know what? I'm like, where's this conversation going to go? I'm like, I'm not like, this person is obviously, retarded himself. So it's just,
I easily give up too.
Yeah.
Once we get to a certain point where it's like, okay, you're just arguing stuff, you're not really thinking. Like, I do this for a living. I don't need to make myself crazy. I just walk away. That's the biggest insult that I'll ever give you is just disengagement. Because if I think you're worth talking to, like, I'll do it all day. But if I walk away, like, I have no respect for you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Or I'm tired and I need another drink. But yeah, for the most part, I just don't even engage anymore. There's no point.
Yeah, because even if you disagree with somebody, those conversations can be your most delightful conversations. Those are the ones where you're really, even at times, you're second guessing. Like, somebody makes such a good point that you're starting to question your own stance on a topic. Those are the great conversations because we don't have all the answers and we're consistently wrong. And if you're open-minded, you realize that a lot. I remember having a conversation with a buddy and he's like, dude, you have a lot of well-established opinions and a lot of opinions that you don't have established at all. I'm like, yeah, because I don't have all the answers. And the more information I gather, the more I realize that I don't even want to jump on one opinion and say this is my opinion because I'm not sure that's correct. And so I think that those type of conversations are important because we should question ourselves and question why we believe things. Are we picking a team? Have somebody I'm listening to, have they influenced my own opinion? Is it really my opinion or is it somebody else's opinion? Like you said, whoever the podcaster is, you're a fan of theirs, so now you want to agree with whatever they say. So it's just, I think that's dangerous too. And I think every once in a while we have to take a step back, look in the mirror, and kind of wonder, like, why do I believe these things, and what's influencing it, and does somebody else make a point? So I think, that's really important. And but I will. And
if the person that you're being influenced by never says they don't know, that's a sign too. People who are actually thinking about things will admit when they don't know things. But someone who has an answer to everything, it's like, okay, I don't think you're really thinking about what you're saying.
I feel like people think it's a sign of weakness. Like anytime you say you don't know something, people are like, see, you're an idiot. Everything you said wasn't valid. It's like, you don't know something, but I think it's actually a sign of strength. It's this idea that you're admitting that, you know what, when I do say I know something, you can be a little bit more confident that I have some reason to believe so, because when I don't know something, I'll actually tell you, and so I think that it's this thing where people just don't want to admit that they don't know something because they know it's going to jump down their throat, where I've been in debates with people where people be like, well, did you know this? And I'm like, no. And before they even explain what it is, it's like, I got you. It's like, like, see, I know something you don't know. It's like, well, it's not about that. Are we sharing ideas? Or are we just trying to, is it a pissing contest where we're just trying to win? It's like, I'm not really interested in winning. Like, it's not, I'm interested in sharing ideas and trying to grow and then try to have a better understanding of the world around us. And like I've also said in this podcast, I think all this information is important because life is a giant puzzle with a billion puzzle pieces, and every piece of information that you think you understand is one more piece of that puzzle, and things become more clear and the picture becomes clearer. So I think that's important. I think that's what we're all trying to do, is trying to have a better understanding of ourselves and the world around us, and how we can, because there is no clear-cut answer. Capitalism, socialism, there's no clear-cut answer that this is the ideology that will fix the issues, or design,
Well, it's probably not going to be an ideology.
Yeah.
That's the thing. As soon as we can drop the labels and the ideologies and be like, oh, the world fits into this box, like, you have to take issue by issue. And if someone's just like taking this recipe that they think is going to work, it almost never does. I mean, right now we're really dealing with free market ideology controlling our country. People that, with no proof, say that if you have no regulation on the market, everything's going to work out fine. And no, I don't know where they get this from. I don't know why they think it's true, but that's something that has a big stranglehold on the people running our government right now. And so, and it's just ideology where they just have this like, oh, here's a problem. Well, this is the recipe for solution, just less regulation and we're done. It's also some ideological laziness going on when you have an ideology you always stick to no matter what, because I don't think there's been one in all of history that's actually worked in the way that the recipe is supposed to. It just never does. Any ism, it's like, screw your ism. Look at the problem.
And I think the libertarians, they make the argument that they haven't had a true libertarian type of society where you've had complete free market, and and that's the thing. Like you haven't had that, so you're basing. So you want to change all of society based on the idea that we haven't established work yet. So it's like, we'll try it, and then when it doesn't work, like, oops, we fucked up, like, it didn't work. Like, that's not, so it's this idea that people are so passionate about this ism that they can't be sure worked, because it's never in history has somebody honestly had or even an anarcho-libertarian ideology where it's like, well, no government, and everybody just that idea, it's never been proven to work, and some people are so passionate about it that I'm just like, how can you be so sure that this is going to work when there's been no tests, no examples? And like you said, I think what will eventually work will be a mixture of all of them. You take all the best ideas and you and I think that's what this government should and should have been if everything worked the way it probably should have worked.
Still can be.
Yeah, still can be. Yeah, because I think the founding fathers, a lot of their ideas made sense, and then people found loopholes and found ways to corrupt that system, and then we end up getting what we have today. But I won't hold you up anymore. We talked for I don't know how long, for an hour and a half, but thank you so much. I know you're a busy girl and you got a podcast you want to release, and thank you so much for being back on. I really appreciate it, and it's always fun.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks. And so your next episode is on what? You said it's...
The next episode is a project I've been working on for like 9 months, and I'm just going state by state and telling you how to get on the ballot as an independent. And it's a more interesting episode than it sounds like, because the range is just unbelievable to me. And then some of the experiences I had in getting the information from certain states it was just more difficult than I thought it was going to be. So I just kind of run down the list and tell people, give them an idea of what to do. You'll figure out which states are the hardest or which states are actually quite doable. And now that I have this information, we can go from there. But it all stems from, my own delusions of one day getting into Congress and raising some hell. So it was really a project for me. I wanted to know which states I'd have to move to have the best chance, and so I'm just sharing what I found. It's gonna be a cool episode. It's not gonna be as mind blowing as Anthrax or the AUMF, but
I think it's important because it goes with the theme of the show, and that's I think what you were arguing was the fact that people can make a difference, and you're giving them a way how. This is how. These are the states where it's easier to get on a ballot, easier to really get involved. So I think it's important.
I'm starting to get this plan in my head. I'm starting to get a vision of how we could actually fix things federally, or at least start to. And it all starts in the House of Representatives and getting people in there. So it's like I'm taking baby steps to being like, okay, I kind of have this fuzzy big picture of how it's going to work. Now, what do we have to do to make this happen? And like I said, I think just someone needs to be first, even if that someone needs to be me. So
yeah.
I don't know. My husband's willing to move. I think we're going to have to with this stupid, top 2 primary system that we have here. But I don't know, if there's a group of people in a district that wants me to represent them, people tell me that they want me to all the time. If they're willing to mobilize their neighbors, like, shit, I'll go try a new state for a year. I've moved every year for the last 5 years. Might as well do it again. So, yeah, I'm open to it.
And that's awesome. So definitely, people keep supporting the podcast. Give her some 5-star ratings. You shitheads who gave her 1-star ratings, go to hell.
Those are the team people. You know what? Actually, looking at the 1 stars is kind of fun, because in every single one of them, you can tell which team they're on. Every one of them. They just didn't like something I said, and it was just like, ow!
That's the thing, yeah. That's like YouTube comments, like YouTube commenters. Like I've been pretty lucky that actually for a while now I haven't got a real shithead, but for a while I had like this couple months where like every time I got a notification on YouTube, I'm like, this is gonna be bad, and it always.
I stopped looking at iTunes. It hurts.
Yeah. iTunes, YouTube. It's like, well, I think the majority of people who like something don't comment on it. They don't do anything. They just enjoy it and they move on. And so I think the people who go out of their way to write something negative is that probably says something about their character and what type of person they are to begin with. So how much does their opinion really matter? I mean, it's like if I had I have buddies of mine that I know their opinions don't matter at all when it comes down to politics. Like he could be that shithead who gives me that shitty comment, and I'm all like beat up about it, thinking like this person's opinion matters, when really if I met him in person, I'm like, this guy's a shithead. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Why do I care about what he has to say? So
it's just hard because you're putting yourself out there, instead of have strangers like call you names and tell you you're doing something wrong. Like, I'm working really hard not to take it personally, but it's hard sometimes. And they always tell you to not look at your reviews if you're in a bad mood, because like you'll basically hang yourself. But then I'm in a good mood, and I was like, why would I want to ruin this? So I've just stopped looking at them entirely, and I'm actually a happier person. Yeah. So I know that the ratings are pretty good, and I always appreciate more because it does help in iTunes. But I don't know, those bad ones hurt so bad that I just I don't want to see it.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I mean, it's definitely one of those things where you're like you said, you're putting yourself out there. You're putting all this hard work, time, and effort into putting out this content, but you can't please everybody, and that's the thing. Like, you can't please everybody, and obviously you're getting a lot of downloads. You're being invited on a lot of shows, so you're doing something that people love, and those are ones that matter. Everybody else, it's there's enough other shows and stuff like that, where if they don't like what you're doing, they can find something else. There's no need to harass, like you said, your ratings or your rankings on iTunes by giving you a bad review. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think people realize how harmful it is to the podcast to do a 1-star thing. And actually just telling people that gives them power, because now they know how to hurt me. But I don't think people realize the significance of that. I think we as podcasters know, but I don't think I don't think they think anything of it. I think they think it's like a Yelp review. I don't think they realize that it actually hurts where you appear.
Yeah. But
whatever.
Hey, you know what? We love what you're doing, and keep it up. And
Thank you.
And the thing is that I've always been a believer in. Before I got into podcasting, I did music, and another thing that I've played. I remember playing a gig where a guy wrote me like a huge essay on why my band sucked. And it was hilarious because I thought it was one of those shows where everybody was rocking. It seemed like a really good time. And I remember, after the show getting drunk and just having a blast. And then the next morning I read this essay and I'm like, really? I'm like, where was this guy all night? But the point is that I learned at a young age, it's anytime you put something out there, you better just be open to the fact that you're going to be a punching bag for somebody. But you know what? I'd still rather be the person doing something and being criticized than the person who's doing nothing and just criticizing. So,
yeah.
So
yeah, if you put yourself on the other side of that, it's in what world would I go out of my way to hurt someone who's making anything out of scratch?
Yeah.
It's there's no cause for that. And if that's something you feel the need to do, there's probably something wrong in your life. Because
absolutely, there's probably some internal issues that's with most people. I think most people have really negative, shitty attitudes. I think it has something to do with some internal pressures or issues that they're dealing with, and their way of making everybody else just as miserable as they are. So that's kind of the way I look at it. But like I said, I still would rather be doing something and attempting to do something. And looking back at life, I think we'd be much happier still doing this, even with some criticism, than doing nothing. And at least,
sure.
Yeah. So, but thanks again, Jen. Really appreciate it.
Always fun.
Yeah, always fun, and we'll have you on again in the future. Keep up the good work.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks, Jen. See ya.